When I reached my 12th birthday, I had plans to go to college. I thought myself capable of college, but my mother said no. She says, you will learn to make a bed and keep a house and be a wife. And from the time I became 12 years old, that became the most important goal of my life, to get married. My mother dressed me up in a little red corduroy two-piece suit, with little brown suede wedgie shoes, and sent me out to my first adult dance with the instructions that I was to find a husband. And from the time I was 12 onward, that became the sole focus of my existence. And nothing else mattered. Not school, not college, nothing. And I remember coming home from that dance, where I had danced with nobody because I was a little kid, and everybody else, you know, the women were full-blown women. I wasn't. I was still a little kid. Nobody danced with me. I remember starting to cry, leaving the place, taking the bus home, and my mother was waiting for me when I came in through the door, and she said to me, did you have a good time? And of course I was crying. No, of course I didn't have a good time. And she looked at me and she said to me, I don't care who he is, if he's black or white, crippled or blind, the first one who asks you, you grab him. And that became the primary goal, the primary focus of my life. And when I reached 16 and still wasn't married, my mother started running through the apartment, tearing at her hair and screaming over the fact that she had an old maid for a daughter. So the pressure to get married was so extreme that I did exactly what she said. I married the first one who asked me. I didn't care for him. There were things about him that troubled me. I was absolutely not attracted to him. And my mother started to make plans for a big wedding. And I can remember the night before my wedding, looking up at the sky. I was 17. Looking up at the sky and finding a star and saying, starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. And my wish was that I would learn to love him. But that didn't happen. And the marriage was a horrible failure. I stayed with it for 9 years. I had 2 children. I finally took my children and left because it was unbearable. And even though I didn't have a career and I didn't have an education and I had no plan for the future, my goal was to get the hell away with my kids as quickly as I could, because we were all in serious danger of emotional and physical harm. So I left. And of course, my mother and father did not believe the things I told them. And my mother said, in effect, don't ever darken my door again, neither you or your children. I moved into a small apartment. My brother helped me. My brother said something to me as I was going through the travail of this fiasco called a marriage. He said to me, think of the worst thing that can happen to you. And if you can endure the worst thing that can happen to you, then do it. If you don't think you can endure it, then don't do it. But it's your decision. And that's what I did. I thought of the worst thing that could happen to me, which would be to be alone, because at that point in time, the idea of being alone with 2 kids and no way to make a living was terrifying. But the idea of staying was more terrifying. So I took an apartment. I took half of what we had accumulated in the marriage. And I left. And I remember crying myself to sleep night after night after night because I was so frightened. I had no idea what I had let myself in for, but I knew what I could no longer do. That was the hardest time of my life, because I saw my son and I saw my daughter, and their world had been upended by my move. And they were both, especially my son, was very, very unhappy. And I saw it and I knew it, but of course he didn't know why I left, and I chose not to burden these 2 little kids. And so I didn't. And I watched him envelop within himself in order to protect himself from the pain he was feeling. And my daughter reached out to him in confusion and fear. It was hard. It was very, very hard. And in New Jersey, the law was that you had to be legally separated for 2 years before you could get a divorce. And I got a job in a stock brokerage office. And so I sent the kids off to school in the morning, and then I went to work. And I learned how to be a stockbroker. And I learned how to operate a switchboard, because in those days, we didn't have the technology. So when an order was placed, it was placed by phone. You plugged in with the switchboard down to the floor and you purchased your shares or whatever. And my children went through adventures, some good and some not so good, but it certainly taught them to be self-sufficient, because I wasn't home. I was away working, and then I began to make friends, and I began to develop a life of my own. As my salary improved, I moved into a larger place, more comfortable place. But I lived next to a woman who was also in a similar situation, whose husband went to court and got her kids, and she was without her children. And she only had visitation periodically, and the thought of that terrified me, because I knew what a spiteful person my husband was, and I knew he would try to hurt me. And so I was very frightened that my kids would be taken from me. So that was a stressful period of time.
What advice would you give to women or men out there who are in an abusive relationship?
That's an interesting question because I had to confront it in this point in my life as well. Not for me, but for somebody close to me. Back then, being a virgin when you got married was number one. There was no such thing as premarital sex, or at least if you were a decent person, there was no such thing. The girls who were more promiscuous, were more free-thinking, were considered sluts and were treated by society as such. So a young girl entered into a marriage, for the most part, unexperienced. And I realize now, all these many years later, and of course I've realized it ever since, that you can't really get to know a person until you live with them. You can't marry a stranger and expect not to be surprised. There were things about my first husband that were intolerable, but I didn't know they were intolerable because I would see him once a week on a Saturday date. And it isn't until we actually were involved in our marriage that the things that ultimately led to our divorce were so prominent and so disruptive to our marriage. And I don't want to go into detail about it because it's too intimate. It's too painful still. My advice to somebody would be, don't be in a hurry. Take your time. Get to know the person. See the response to things that happen in life, how they react when you two disagree, how you react when you're in a heated argument, how you react when something serious or even tragic happens in your life. And listen carefully, not only with your heart, but with your ears and your brain, to the things a person says to you, because there are clues there, if you're willing to listen. Clues that tell you the character of this person. Clues that tell you the mentality of this person. You're making a lifetime commitment. You're bringing human life into this world. Be sure. There's worse things than being alone. Worse than being alone is living with somebody you have no business being with.
If someone is in an abusive marriage right now, what should they do?
It's interesting that you ask that question, what to do in the event you find yourself in an abusive marriage. There are a lot of things to consider. First of all, the state in which you live. If you live in a community property state, you're going to react very differently than if you don't live in a community property state. That's number one. Number two, try marriage counseling. If you've already brought children into the world, don't be in a hurry. Try marriage counseling. If the person is not willing to try marriage counseling, then clearly the person is not willing to continue the marriage. If you can't come to terms with these things, separate. Try a legal separation. See if you're apart from each other and you're more clear in your heart and your emotion, if you can't find some solution. Because children of a broken marriage are affected, even years and years and years later. And there's harm done. And the harm results in an affected person and a harmed person. And those things then carry forward to the next generation. So do your very best. First of all, don't get involved if there are any doubts at all. Don't think so much in terms of yourself as the children that will result and the effect it'll have on them. And don't be in a hurry. Take your time. Live together. See whether or not you really are compatible in all aspects of your life. It's not just one. You know, sex is great, but it's not the only thing. And eventually the flame simmers, and you're left with the residue and the responsibility and the recriminations and the regret. You have only one life to live. You don't get a second chance at it. And those things, those mistakes, and the consequences of those mistakes are with you for your entire lifetime. Sometimes you can overcome it, sometimes you can't. This is what I would say to somebody. And do your very best, find any avenue to come to terms with things before you actually get a divorce. Try your best. Try your best.
What parenting advice would you give to other single mothers?
The advice I would give to other single mothers, which I did not follow, I must admit, give your children your attention. Look at them clearly and see what their needs are. It's a very hard thing to do because you've just entered into a very difficult life and you're concerned about your own welfare and your own means of making a living and your own survival in this strange new world. I married when I was just over my 18th birthday. And all of a sudden, here I am, almost 30 years old, still in my late 20s, entering a world I'd never been in before. It's a very different world. First of all, back then, a divorced woman was perceived as fair game. Divorce back then was not typical. And if you went into the social scene, you were considered to be fair game. And the pressure was enormous. We didn't have nannies. We didn't have au pairs. Children were left alone, and they had to manage on their own. I think if I had to do it all over again, I think I would have prepared better because I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I really didn't. And my children were left alone a lot, and they had to learn how to be self-sufficient. And these are little kids. This is a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And they had to learn how to handle things and how to manage things. And so if I were to think back, I would say to single mothers, prepare yourself financially so that you didn't have to be away from your children at a time when they needed you so badly. My husband said to me when I told him I was leaving that I would leave with nothing more than the shirt on my back. And that's what happened. I was not afforded alimony. because the attorney said to me that I probably would remarry at some point, and at that point the alimony would end. I should instead take child support, which is what I did. So the child support continued until my children graduated medical school. It was good advice. Had I been able to receive alimony, I wouldn't have had to have been away so much and working so full time, because I had to pay rent and I had to buy food and I had to clothe the kids and medical bills and all of the things that is required when you're raising children and taking care of yourself. Had I had sufficient funds, I would have been able to be with my kids more at a very critical time in their lives. And yes, it made them strong and it made them self-sufficient, but they had to struggle to reach that point. And the struggle was very painful for them.